Hello Year 9, welcome to English, and today we're doing something a little bit different. So we have finished Women in Spectacles for the time being. Obviously we're going to revisit it in Year 10 and 11, but that's us done for now. Really impressed with those of you that submitted your Gerald assessments. So good to keep up the practice because I know it's quite an arduous job, so well done, really impressed. As you can see from my video, we are looking at some poetry now, and the aim between now and the end of term is to look at the first 3 poems in your poetry anthology, and this too will be studied for GCSE. Obviously, I'm not going to be teaching it in the same way I would in the classroom, and again, we are going to revisit this stuff in Year 10 and 11, so please don't panic about it. You'll see a strange looking word as our title, and it's Ozymandias, and I'll explain a little bit more about who that is in a while. So, we're going to think about what power and conflict actually mean, then who Percy Shelley was, he's the poet that wrote Ozymandias, then we'll read the poem, do some work on understanding it, and finally we will consolidate our understanding so we make sure we get everything. Poetry, I don't know, people have quite a few perceptions or preconceived ideas about poetry. I love a bit of poetry, hopefully you will feel the same way and enjoy my cat pictures. They literally never let me work. This is my life. Okay, so what is power and conflict? What I would like you to do, please, is either create a mind map or a list of what power and conflict mean to you. So what different types of power can you think of? What different types of conflict? You might find it helpful to Google the meanings of those words too. So for power, you could have the power of knowledge, you could have physical strength, you might think about the power that politicians have, you might think about who has power in our school. And for conflict, you could think about different wars, you could think about conflicts between individuals, you could think about inner conflict, cultural conflict. There's lots of stuff you can explore here, but it's really useful because that's kind of the theme of the poems we're going to be studying. It's really useful to make sure you have a good understanding of what power and conflict means to you. So I would take 5 minutes with this task, create a mind map or a list of power and conflict. Pause the video now and come back in 5 minutes. Okay, so before we even look at the poem, we need to think a little bit about our poet. Very dapper looking man, Percy Shelley, correct? Percy is a man. I would like you to make sure that you make some notes on this. It would be even better if you could do your own independent research, because he was quite an interesting guy. He married Mary Shelley, who's the lady that wrote Frankenstein when she was about 18. So his life was pretty interesting. Anyway, you're going to need a few notes on him. Don't write it all down. Pick the key bits. I've made some stuff bold so you can look at it. So he was born in 1792 and he died just before his 30th birthday in a drowning accident. In 1822. He lived in a rapidly changing Britain. There was a lot of change going on, and as a romantic poet, romantic with a capital R, remember, he was kind of affected by the Industrial Revolution and inspired by the French Revolution. He wanted to see change. He wanted more democracy, more freedom, less oppression, and he really hated the disparity between the classes. So he hated the upper class people were really rich and poor people were really poor. He thought it was too big of a gap. So he wanted equality. He wanted all men to have the right to vote, which didn't even happen until 1928. That sounds like a lie. Double check that. I think I've lied to you. Maybe I meant to say 18. And he wanted political reform. He hated the government. So we know that he was kind of an anti-establishment character. So the second question is, who then was Ozymandias? So Ozymandias is another name for Ramses II, who was the king of Egypt in the 13th century BC. He was a really powerful man, but he was a cruel leader, and he forced slaves to do stuff for him. So not a particularly nice character. So I'd like you to make some notes on Percy Shelley, double check my facts that I think I lied about, and just write down who Ozymandias was, because it's going to make your understanding of the poem a lot easier. Do that now, pause it, and then come back when you're done. Okay, I'm going to read the poem to you, you lucky, lucky people. And it goes a little like this. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell with its sculptor well those passions red which yet survive. Stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So that's our poem. A lot of the time with poetry, I hear students saying like they don't get it. And the truth is that the first time you read a poem, often you won't get everything. I mean, I've obviously been teaching this sort of thing a while, and every time I read a poem again, every time I teach it again, I notice something different. I understand it in a little bit of a different way. So what I'd like you to do, now that you've heard me read it to you, is pause the video and take some time to read through it again. See if you can make sense of it. What's the story? What's happening in the poem? What's the narrative? So pause it now and maybe watch it a couple more times. Okay, because I'm a delight, I've made a little storyboard because the story within the story is a little bit confusing. You don't have to copy this down unless you want to because it will help your understanding. But this is a kind of explanation of the poem. So the poem starts off by saying this guy met a traveller from an antique land, so from an ancient place. He met another guy, and the guy told him about these kind of legs and face that were in the middle of the desert. So trunkless just means they're not attached to a body, it's just a pair of legs. And visage is just another word for face. So there's like these legs in the middle of nowhere and half a face on the floor, all shattered. And you can see on the face that whoever the sculpture is of was kind of quite a cruel person. They had like a sneer on their face, you could tell. And then over here you've got the person saying you could tell that the sculptor knew exactly what the person was like that he was drawing. He was a cruel leader, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal, that's the bit that the statue stands on, the words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. So again, we know that the person who ordered this statue to be made was really arrogant, felt really powerful. And then right at the end, you've got this bit, so nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So this guy that had all this power is now totally forgotten about and has been consumed by the sand. Like, there's nothing left of him. So I suppose what Shelley's saying is that no matter how much power you have in life, nature will outlast human power. So that's just to explain a little bit about what the poem's about. If you're still a little bit lost, there's loads of really good websites. If you just say Ozymandias explained or analysis, if you Google that, it'll tell you a little bit more about it and explain it, probably in a more coherent way than I have. So what I would like you to do first with the poem is think about which words or phrases you could use to describe Ozymandias. So I've started you off and I've said you could call him arrogant. You might also have cruel, powerful, any of those sorts of things. So you're thinking about what he's like, what that character's like. I'd only spend a couple of minutes on this task, so pause the video now, do the task, and then come back. Okay, next bit. So I'd like us to pick apart the poem in a little bit more detail. I'm not going to get you to copy the whole thing out because that seems like madness when you're going to be given anthologies when we return to school. So what I've done is I've highlighted different parts of the poem, and they're the quotes I'd like you to look at. And what I'd like you to do with each quote is copy it out into your exercise books or on a Word document and do a sketch or insert a picture of what the words are describing, and then think about the connotations of the words, so what you associate with them. So I've done an example up there. So I've talked about antique land. Antique suggests it's old, quaint, valuable, ancient. the fact that it's an antique land makes it sound quite mysterious, like it's quite far away or dated. And then there's a delightful image that I definitely didn't draw because you all know what my artistic skills are like. So I would like you to do that for each of the quotes that have been highlighted in your exercise books or in a Word document. I think that'll probably take you between 10 and 15 minutes. So pause it now and then come back. Okay, so I'm going to show you a series of statements. And what I'd like you to do is think about which 3 you agree with the most. There are only a couple of ones in there that don't really relate to the poem at all, so mostly it's down to your opinion. So I would like you, once I've read the statements out, to pick the 3 you agree with the most about the poem, write them down and explain why you agree with them. So the first one, the poem explores power and status. True. But is it the one you agree with the most? The poet admires Ozymandias. Ozymandias was once a proud, tyrannical ruler. The poem suggests we have all the time in the world. The poem is about legacies and what we leave behind after we die. The poet suggests that pride comes before a fall. The poem is about time and nature and how man cannot conquer either. Shelley suggests that art and language will outlast humans and other legacies of power. The reader is left to imagine the sculptor as well as Ozymandias' character. And finally, it's ironic, but it's the sculptor's legacy that will last and not Ozymandias' power. So I'd like you to look at those statements, write down 3 of them, the ones you agree with the most, and explain why you agree with them the most. Okay. Do that now, probably between 5 and 10 minutes. Pause and come back. Okay, so just something about the form of the poem, which means what type of poem is it? And don't worry if it's all a bit overwhelming, we are going to revisit this in the following years when we're back at school properly. So this poem is written in a sonnet form, and you might have heard of the word sonnet when you've been studying Shakespeare. He wrote like 130 of them, actually more, 154, something like that, can't remember. But a sonnet is 14 lines long. It's written in iambic pentameter, and that language is normally the bit that throws students a little bit. All it means is that it's 5 beats per line, kind of like a heartbeat. So the rhythm of the poem is meant to be like da-dum, 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 da-dum. So I met a traveller from an antique land. That's kind of how it's meant to be read. Sonnets also have quite a clear rhyme scheme, and they're usually about love, but they can explore time and death too. So we can think that perhaps Shelley is using this form ironically. He's kind of telling us that Ozymandias was full of self-love because he was so arrogant and egotistical. However, as we know, he kind of now lies shattered and decayed. There's nothing left of him. So what I'd like you to do is make some notes on the sonnet form. Just make sure it's written down, because then when we come back to it, you'll have the muscle memory there to think, actually, no, we have covered this at some point, even if it hasn't totally gone in. Do that now. Okay, so in order to consolidate our understanding of the poem, I would like you to write me a paragraph or 2 about this question. So in your books, you're going to need to write down, how does Shelley create a negative impression of Ozymandias? And what I've done is 3 boxes. So the first one is if you'd like a little bit of support, these are your sentence starters. So Shelley creates a negative impression of Ozymandias by making him sound arrogant and cruel. This is evident in the quote, sneer of cold command. This implies that he was a tyrannical ruler and he didn't respect or care for his people. If you're kind of in the middle and you think, yeah, no, I reckon I could do this actually, try to incorporate terminology where applicable, so alliteration, metaphors, similes. Make sure you develop your analysis. So zoom in on a word or a phrase from your quote and make sure you link your ideas back to that original question at the end of your paragraph. And if you're feeling super confident, you're fine with poetry, you're loving life, then try to link some of your ideas to context. So what we know about Shelley and how he felt about the power that organisations had. This is where your extra research might come in handy. And think about the structure and form, so how you can link the idea of a sonnet to this this poem and how it creates a negative impression of Ozymandias. I'd give yourself 10 to 15 minutes. Do at least one paragraph. If you're feeling confident, I'd love to see more of your work. It's always nice to see kind of your ideas on these sorts of things. So pause it now if you have to, and then come back. Okay, this is entirely optional, so you don't have to do it. But if you're super bored and you're loving English, because who wouldn't, you can either create a storyboard detailing the events in the poem, or write a short story poem rap about someone who loses all their power. You can use what you want for inspiration, if you like. It can be fictional, it can be based on a true event, doesn't matter to me. So this is optional, you don't have to do this, but again, I love seeing your creative work. So if you decide to do it, even better. And finally, as always, submit your work via assignments on Teams. I know lots of you are doing the work, but sometimes you don't upload it to Teams, which means that I don't know who's engaging in it or not. So if you're doing a Word document, I think it's fairly easy. But if you don't have access to a laptop and stuff at home, that's fine. You can just take a picture on a phone and upload it that way, or email me. Anyway, missing seeing your faces as always. Hope you've enjoyed this delightful introduction to poetry. Take care of yourselves. Only a few weeks left now.